Good morning, everybody. It's your Self Shift crew back for another Saturday morning podcast. We're continuing our happiness and contentment podcast today with episode 3. Quote, I was the biggest single cause of my unhappiness, or I was the single biggest cause of my unhappiness is probably grammatically more correct. So as usual, we're going to start off with a couple of quotes. This is from an unknown source, but it really resonated, at least with me. I am the only one responsible for my misery, for I am the master of my own mind. And another one from Eckhart Tolle. I really do try to condense these into a single quote, but I find myself overthinking it and bringing multiple quotes in each time. But this is a good one from Eckhart Tolle. The primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation, but your thoughts about it. And, kind of as we jump in here, this is something that I've certainly put a lot of thought in over the years, because I can look back over most of my life and say with, very factually that I was absolutely the single biggest cause of my unhappiness, right? And until I went on my journey of mindfulness and self-discovery and self-improvement, did I even recognize that I was the single biggest cause of my unhappiness. So before we jump into the meat, initial thoughts, Doug.
Yeah, I think this is a good one. This is probably, I think, one of my weakest points as far as I'm definitely someone who engages in negative self-talk. I'm definitely someone who, I think reflection is good, and reflection in the concept of mindfulness as far as just stepping back and observing is good. But it's bad when you suddenly get judgmental and, you get into negative self-talk and, you just start into the negative thought spirals that you can get into. And so you have to work at kind of bringing yourself out of those things. Again, I think being able to separate yourself from the situation and understand like what's really going on, and telling yourself, okay, am I telling myself a story about what's happening? Am I like thinking about how this is going to play out in a way that really reflects reality? I need to kind of step back and quit thinking about how things could go wrong and think more about just being in the moment and understanding, where I'm at the moment and not reflecting so negatively. So I thought.
Yeah, no, you hit on some really, really key points that I think we'll be double clicking on here in a second. Derek, your initial thoughts.
Yeah, well, you opened with the quote I was going to use by Eckhart Tolle. So great minds must think alike, right? So awesome quote to lead us in. I think it's just very simply for me and understanding this topic, it really comes down to as you think you are, and the situation is always the situation, and it's what you interject as your thoughts or in your assessment, what you tie a meaning to it is what will give you your perspective or your feeling about the situation. So, it all comes back to, again, it's your thinking, your thoughts, and that incessant stream of thoughts that's constantly going in our minds. And then, and that will drive how we see things. And, and that gets connected often to what you were saying, Doug, self talk, and how you say what you say about yourself is how you show up. And so I think that just as the lead in, that pretty much sums it up for my perspective.
Those are all really good points. And I'm going to start off, I don't want to just read a list here, but did a little bit of research about some of the in the literature about, what are the types of things or the behaviors or whatever that really drive being the single biggest cause of your unhappiness. Doug nailed it on the first one. Negative self-talk. Some of the other ones, and this number 2 has been something that I've had to really overcome, is procrastination. Because if you chronically procrastinate, you do become your own blocker, right? And you have to get out of your own way. So adjusting the habit loops, we talked a little bit about this last week, so that I recognize a trigger or something that's causing me to procrastinate. I need to break it down into more simple steps, just take, one action and start moving forward is something that I really tried to apply myself to. And it's actually worked pretty well for me, but that was a really big issue for me. Holding grudges was another one. And I will say that, as I've gotten, learned my journey with mindfulness and being present, holding grudges I've been able to release that, right? I don't know that I was ever a big grudge holder, but I did remember things that people maybe did in the past, and learning how to forgive and get past that has been really critical for me. Other ones, unrealistic expectations, overthinking, which has been massive for me, comparing yourself to others, Fear of failure is another one. People pleasing, right? And if you're a people pleaser, then that's certainly, and I've suffered from that, is something that will absolutely cause you to be a big, the single biggest cause of your unhappiness. Dwelling in the past, lack of self-care was another big one. And I would like to throw just a couple of things on there. And Derek, you talked about it, and Doug as well. Catastrophizing, which I think could be part of the overthinking piece, but just to call it out, with the negativity bias that we have as part of our evolution and the fact that our brains are really functioning to ensure our survivability and not make us happy, it's something that being mindful and meditation has really helped me get by, contain, right? In the sense that observing thoughts, recognizing what's happening. Oh, this is, the brain is coming up with this because it's trying to protect me or whatever. And assuming that everything won't be the worst, or I'm sorry, not assuming that everything will be the worst has been very, very beneficial to me. The other key thing, and you both talked about this as well, is assigning value to events, right? And assigning value, personally to things that, of course, events themselves inherently don't have any value, but me assigning the worst possible value or the best possible value has been something that caused a lot of issues with me in the past. And then recognizing that, hey, it's just an event. We all have different perspectives, and I'm probably assigning the worst possible connotation to an event. When I look at it and think about it, it's probably not that bad. Or just reframing it that, I did learn something from that, or I was able to do this, or parlay that into that. Any of those resonate with you? Start with you, Doug. Other than you already nailed the self-talk one.
Yeah, I think it all does. Every one of those I sort of had sketched out some of my own notes as well. And I think you hit on a lot of them. One of them that sort of hit me was expectations. When you set a lot of expectations and then things don't play out exactly like you were expecting, that you tend to then assign this negative value to them. So a quote I had seen was from Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher. But he said the greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. So, obviously one of the biggest themes we have across our discussions is mindfulness. And again, we've all kind of discovered the value and how it really helps when you can take a moment, just breathe, just observe your thoughts, recognize they're just thoughts, and really focus less on what's happened in the past or what could happen in the future, and just be present and be kind of content with what's going on around you today. And this honestly is something, it's one of those learnings that I really had no concept about until I kind of read it. And I think we've talked in one of our prior episodes about how I would just be kind of like, why not? And I would think about how things could go right if I choose something. And so I tend to, I either put very negative expectations on things, or I put very positive expectations on things. And really having those expectations, the future almost never lines up with those negative or positive expectations. It just is what the future plays out to be. And so I think that expectation thing is a really impactful part of how you impact your own personal happiness.
Well said. Well said. Derek?
Yeah, that's awesome. Well said, Doug. I would say, adding to the list, I don't know if you said this, catching all of them, but judgment of self or judgment of others, I feel like is, when you judge something, that means you're assessing something, looking at it, you're measuring it compared to something that you think that they should be, or you think the situation should be, and that creates a connection to that energy of unhappiness, I think. And I think that's a big one in the world today, is the judgment and condemnation of the human society and the culture. And I think that drives a lot of unhappiness. You look at the neighbor's car and you say, well, I want that. It's more of jealousy, or I got to have that. And because I don't have it, I'm unhappy, and I think it's that ego, the egoic drive for something that you're not, or something that you want that you don't have. And I think that is a big driver of people's unhappiness. And you could have the biggest yacht on the planet, but still be the most miserable and happiest person. And so, I think that's, for me, that's one of the big ones that stands out. I would say, and one more point to make here is, I think putting yourself in situations that are not good for your well-being, I think that will lead you to a spiraling path of unhappiness. And going back, in a sense, going back for those putting yourself in negative situations, or going back for more punishment, in a sense, from somebody that might be hateful or verbally abusive or even physically abusive in some way. Just going back to that situation and putting yourself in that will definitely bring a substantial amount of unhappiness in your life.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I'm going to double click on something you said there as well. I think it's really important. That is, we talked about comparing ourselves to others. That was on the list there. And you took a slightly different approach about, like, if somebody got a new car or whatever, or you're comparing your lifestyle to somebody else's lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that people can do, because we've done it as part of our journey, is once you recognize why that's happening, because of evolutionary psychology or evolutionary science, whatever, in the sense that your brain has that bias to try to keep you alive, and you recognize why it's happening and that it is natural part of the human experience, then it becomes easier to manage, right? Yeah, your brain, thanks, brain, for telling me that I really need to have a better car than my neighbor. But in reality, it's going to cost a lot. I've already got a decent car. I don't need one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking through that and recognizing that it's natural to have those thoughts, but don't necessarily have to act on those.
Yeah,
The other thing I think is key, and in a lot of the topics that we talk about, I distill it down to this, is radically accepting what's happening, right? Accepting you can't negotiate with, the past. You got to accept the past, accept where you are, accept where those around you are, align with your values, and take definitive action, right? And when I look through the list here, a lot of those could be mitigated by that simple process. Accept, align with your values, and take definitive action.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, we all have thoughts where we want to punch someone often in our life that makes us angry or mad. And it is a thought, and it does come up in a moment. But being able to not act on that is the key, I think, to what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I'll take a slightly different tangent from those comments around it's a form of negative self-talk, but it's like limiting beliefs about, what we're capable of doing,
Yeah.
or and maybe a little bit of fear of change around if I make a change and things like that. But like, I'm probably, you may not know it to look at me and talk to me, but I'm fairly insecure, or I lack a certain amount of self-confidence. And, again, limiting beliefs, like not even trying because you're worried, or because you're telling yourself you can't even do it, like really prevents you from experiences. Like a lot of happiness is experience based, or things like that. It really prevents you. So you have to catch yourself, say, hey, I'm being hard on myself. I'm not even giving myself a chance. And then that aligns to another theme we talk about, which is growth mindset, of like, I can try and maybe I'll fail, but I'll learn from it. And at least, again, I will have had some experience. And a lot of times that leads to a form of happiness.
Well said. You're spot on today, Doug. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
studied up for this one, didn't you? Awesome.
I have
Yeah, good
13
stuff.
Seneca quotes.
Yeah.
You're doing your
This
homework.
dude's
That's great.
awesome, man.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we are getting close on time, guys. So why don't we go around the horn for some final last thoughts? I'll go ahead and start, and then kind of sum it up, and then we'll go around the horn here. Is that of all of the things that we've talked about today, right? And we've had different experiences. Some of these resonated more with Derek or Doug or Patrick. Some were very, very, cross pollination. But if you go back to the thoughts of meditation and being mindful, right, and radical acceptance, like we've talked about, as I look through the list here, a lot of these are mitigated by those simple practices, right? And these are, relatively easy to get into and that type of thing. And they can be very, very transformative, at least it has been for me, as relates to these topics and many of the other topics that we discussed that we discuss on the Self Shift podcast. So I just want to, kind of reaffirm or reassert that these basic concepts that we keep, talking about in every podcast are really, really key as it relates to self-transformation and reaching a level of contentfulness and happiness that at least I wasn't able to obtain otherwise. Derek?
Yeah, it's just, it comes back to, really getting a handle on what's driving the unhappiness. And it is truly connected to the way you're seeing things from your thoughts, or, your perspective or your own bias or prejudice or judgment that you're connecting, with and to. And so I would just say, really make a conscious effort to be present and, really, understand what's driving you in the moment or not, and really get connected with that, your thoughts, as you think you are. And so if you want to shift the unhappiness to happiness, then start thinking happy things and happy thoughts, and putting yourself in happy situations, things that align to your values, your purpose. If you're in a career and you're miserable, then find another career. And if you got to go back to school to get an education or some skills or whatever to lead you there, then do that for yourself. That's going to lead you to that happy place that you want to be connected with in your career. So that's what I would say is just be present, and take action to what it is that you see is the journey for a healthy, happy place in your life.
Well said, Doug.
Yeah, I think a really hard thing to do is to catch yourself and recognize that you're kind of doing some of these things and that you're kind of causing your unhappiness. And as we emphasized, that's where a tool like mindfulness, like, again, people, when they get started, maybe they're a little skeptical, they don't really understand, but like, it just teaches you to be more aware of, a little bit separated from your thoughts and behaviors, so that you can observe yourself and say, oh, I'm doing it, I'm being really hard on myself, or, oh, I'm putting too much weight on this event, and those kind of things. And so, again, I would encourage people to take a moment and learn a little bit about mindfulness, maybe try it with one of the apps and things, because, again, the number one way to start to get some control around this is to be able to catch yourself, to be able to recognize the behavior. And I'm gonna throw in a couple points here, again, as we've talked about, like self-compassion. Like, would you talk to your friend that way? Would you judge your friend that way? Probably not, but you're probably being really hard on yourself. So a big statement that we make here is be kind to yourself as you navigate life. And I'm going to throw in a second one because Seneca really hit me with this quote. The quote is, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. So I'm going to say, like, hey, when you're feeling really down, when you're struggling, like, take some time and maybe try to recognize how you're behaving. But, besides the be kind to yourself, now I'm going to say be courageous. Okay.
Very nice. Very nice. And I got to double click on one thing you said there is when you've got to lean into these things, become aware of these things, right? Some of these may be subconscious patterns. Until you bring those into the conscious and become aware and become curious about these and explore these, then they're going to continue, right? So be aware, lean into it, become curious, and make it part of, or recognize it, that you can break these habits, so to speak. All right. And we're going to close it out today. Just a couple of things. Remember, self-improvement is possible, and be curious, not judgmental. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.